Can AI write a great book?
AI is not going to be able to write with the deliberateness of illusion that a person who has been deeply influenced.
AI spells the end of academic philosophy as it stands right now.
There's a human being that's behind each of the great books. There's always a human connection.
There are books I can think of that is not a human connection. For Muhammad, for example, those aren't his words, right? Those are the words of Allah.
I sit with Shakespeare and he winces not. I sit with Claude and he winces not.
That text will never be done by AI, but it can't say, how do you feel from the experience you have had to read great books?
A counterpoint to technological determinism, you can build the kind of future that you want.
I'd like to start this off with a question to Jonathan. Can AI, which is as most of us know it so far, is a chat-based technology, can it truly engage in Socratic inquiry, or does it only stimulate the form while missing the essence?
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on what we think the essence of Socratic questioning is. One candidate for the essence is just the semantic words themselves, right? And there, a version of the question you can ask is there anything the wisest human tutor, or even Socrates himself, that would be said or could be said to a potential student that an AI couldn't plausibly, now or in the future, say? Another way to ask this question is, can AI write a great book? Like, if an AI were witness the fall of Rome, would it have the capacity to write The City of God or something like that? And my stance on that is, clearly it can't do it now, but I don't see a reason why it couldn't do it. So on the level of purely semantic content, of the questions asked of the Socratic tutor to the Socratic pupil, I don't think there's anything necessarily that's going to be different. But now the question is, if there's nothing different in the pure semantic language, does the fact that it comes from a human, does that make it anything more meaningful in the Socratic method? And I think definitely the answer is yes, because I just recently gave a lecture on Plato's Symposium. And Alcibiades, who's this aristocratic playboy general, says when he listens to the speeches of Socrates, he's the only man in Athens who's able to allow him to feel shame. And why is that? It's because Socrates, he has a life that backs up the ideas. And we're told how he's able to brace hunger and coldness. And he's at once a very gentle teacher, but also a great warrior in the battlefield. And so the fact that a human is saying these words, I think adds a new dimension that even if AI got it perfect on the semantic content, that would be missing. I'll just say one last point, which is the fact that there is no human saying it, in this case that I gave, is a negative, right? But I could also see it as being positive for Socratic questioning, namely that the person who's questioned is not trying to impress or not trying to win the recognition of such a dialogue. And so one last example here, at Cosmos, we're looking at different kinds of therapy apps, AI therapy apps. And one of the benefits, one of the key reasons cited why AI therapy right now is already better than a lot of human therapy is that the patient is not trying to impress or does not feel any recognition from the system. And so my full answer would be, I don't see a reason why not. AI can generate the semantic content that a human would, and the fact that it's not a human has both positives and negatives that we're going to have to navigate around.
I want to say something about my work on the Black Periodical Literature Project. I say that because it is a record in many ways of emancipated slaves in America becoming educated, going to college, reading great books at places like Fisk, having reading groups in small towns, writing, and that the traces of writing, the traces of the great books, manifest itself in fiction. But if you sit there with a student and say, okay, look at this poem written by somebody 30 years out of slavery who has reacted to Charge of the Light Brigade, right? Or has responded to a poem in Gray's Elegy about mute, inglorious Miltons, right? Of Americans who have not been allowed to speak and have poetry. There is a way that that kind of understanding, the production of that text will never be done by AI. To say for an AI can produce a Tennysonian poem, but it can't say, how do you feel from the experience you have had to read great books? And so there are multiple levels of how we think about what is great literature and what does it mean in the classroom to understand the engagements of people with this work over time, that I think is what I want to do in the classroom after AI delivers the facts.
Thank you very much. I hear something close to a disagreement here, which we might follow up on in a moment, right? So Hollis is saying that there's a certain kind of text that AI is not going to produce. It sounds like you're saying not the great books themselves, but the responses to the great books showing how people are taking them up. And Jonathan, you were saying that you do think that an AI will eventually produce a great book. And it's not exactly the same claim, but those are proximate claims.
Yeah, so I think there's a gradient of how much the person kind of matters. Like, do I really need to understand who Kant was to read Critique of Pure Reason? Like, not as much as, I need to understand who Plato was to read the dialogues, and even more so for an autobiography, of course, like the Confessions, right? Then Augustine's life becomes even more important. And I guess my pushback would be, like, does it really matter that it's Shelley, for example, we read Frankenstein, that literature is created, like, if there's something a lot better, created not by a human, again, there's something lost there. Like, I want to affirm that there's something lost there, but maybe the quality difference is just so big that we just don't end up caring. Another way to frame this is, I think if AI gets to a sufficiently advanced place, it spells kind of the end of academic philosophy as it stands right now, which I take to be kind of this arm's length solving intellectual puzzles that most people don't really apply to their lives. Whereas we might go back to the philosophy as a way of life, kind of emphasis on philosophy, because that's what becomes important. So I'm certainly not saying it can write every genre, and I'm not saying that even in the case that it can write, nothing is lost. But yeah.
Thank you. I want to bring in Brendan here. So we're going to ask you sort of the same question from the opposite side, right? So we're talking about whether there's something that having a text written by a human has in it that an AI couldn't replicate. Let me ask about that from the side of the learning. Is there something, from a philosophical perspective, is there something irreducibly human about learning that AI can't replicate or replace?
Well, there are infinite aspects in the universe, and we have to decide what matters. And we, as humans, give a damn. AI doesn't give a damn. And we decide what matters, and through, the lens of Heidegger, I think it is, we view the world with care and concern. And so I think that is one really significant limitation. Another that I think is significant, but I'm mixed on whether it can be resolved, is that much of the knowledge that guides our action is of a primordially practical character. So when we think of learning, we think about propositional knowledge, or we think of explicit semantic knowledge, things like what you might learn in science, physics. But a lot of knowledge isn't like that. A lot of knowledge is kind of inarticulable knowledge, and for that, we seem to need some experience in the world. And it's not clear to me what kinds of experience we would need and what is preconditional to learning from those experiences, but it definitely is the case that our explicit semantic knowledge, what we consciously picture with our intellect, is in some sense cradled by this tacit dimension of knowledge, and we gain it through trying things out and experiencing the world and enjoying it and getting hurt by it and that sort of thing. And doing it with a kind of volition, like freely. And so can we emulate that with robots? Can they go explore the world and get hurt? Maybe. I don't know. I think that's where I would question. I would question about the limitation.
Something I look for a lot, I think about this question a lot in my own work, and one of the things I am monitoring for in AI's progress, right? I remember it's at least 10 years ago that you saw the first AI programs that could produce a new work by Mozart that could fool some classical music scholars, right? And that was impressive and frightening. Then the question becomes, are they going to create a new Mozart or a new whoever's the answer to Mozart without that already there in their training data? And I think that speaks to the points that all of you are making, right? Which is, if the AI is drawing on the well of human experience that has been put into words, what about the well that hasn't been put into words yet, right? That is a lot of what literature does, great literature does, is to draw attention to things that are already there in the human experience, but nobody's quite been able to pay attention to yet. I don't know that it could or it couldn't. I would be a little bit surprised if it could, but it seems like that's one way to put the open question.
I just wanted to respond to this point because it seems like part of the question has to do with what the status of text is. And Jonathan, I actually thought you were going to talk about Plato's Phaedrus, but I will, since Socrates in the Phaedrus describes a deep problem with writing. That is, that when the word is written down, it can be passed along and separated from its speaker, and it can't explain itself anymore. And that the thing that seems to really matter is what Socrates and Phaedrus describe as the living writing that's written in the soul of the person who knows. Now, that sounds sentimental or something like that, but I think what it's in fact describing is, and it's not just true for writing, it's also true for spoken speech. So people hear words and phrases and slogans and they repeat them. Also a big feature of Plato's dialogues. Lots of people saying things that they don't truly understand. They've heard it from somewhere. So the word the sentence sort of travels as a unit, and then it doesn't get examined. And then the conversation is the place where you discover what those words might mean, and you either make the connection between you, the speaker who wants to say the words, or you don't, you reject it. And this is part of what conversation is, what living conversation is. And I think that one of the things that Phaedrus passage points to is that it's not, one of the whole basis behind this practice of conversation where we examine certain pieces of speech, what it suggests to me is that there's something that's not text, and it's also not even just implicit knowledge. It's the spontaneous human mind that thinks, that reflects, that perceives, that experiences, that puts things together, that doesn't put things together. And I think it's that mind that I encounter when, say, I'm beating my head against Kant in the Critique of Pure Reason, and I'm like, Kant, what are you doing? I'm thinking, what was Kant's mind doing when he, with his, not just with his mind, but also with his will and his heart and his desires, what was he trying to do when he did that? That's part of my exercise as a reader and part of my exercise as a conversationalist. What do you, Jonathan, what do you, Brendan, what do you, Hollis, what are you after? What do you see? What do you understand that's behind your words? So I think looking behind words is crucial to philosophy and crucial to education. And I can't see how a machine could do it.
Yeah. So if I can just respond to that, the metaphor, I'm glad you brought in the Phaedrus. One of my favorite metaphors, I think, is an idea is like a seed. And he asks his interlocutor, where would you want to plant the seed? Would it be in the dead pages of a book or in the living, fertile soil of a man's soul, right? Ensouled speech. So I don't disagree with you on what the end goal is. Right. Is we want to get ensouled speech into people, right?
We want them to do it.
Right. We want them to self-garden.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, can an AI help you get ensouled speech as good as a text can? One reason to think that it can even better is one of the critiques that Socrates has in the Phaedrus of writing is that to everyone it gives the same speech. A book does not know how to hide or withhold or tailor specific ideas to people. LLMs can do that. This is what we're seeing in therapy already, therapy bots. And the last thing I'll say is I totally agree with you. It's important for me when I read a text to think that I won't use mind here, but structure. If I read Kant, I know Kant is a serious thinker. So if there's something I don't understand, I need to work to understand what he's getting at. But I don't see, again, why AI can't eventually have enough, you trust it enough to see that there might be a structure beneath it. And I'll give you an example. Video games against like AI or like just computer NPCs. And it's trying to build a strategy around what you're doing. You think, what is it trying to do? What is the underlying structure here? So I don't think we need a mind behind the text to get in soul speech, but we need a structure to wrestle with. Yeah.
So can I say that I think, and I kind of am halfway between you two on this, right? There's the primary text, there's secondary text, there's the critical community, which is part of what one does when one is a scholar on things. You just don't read the Kant, you read who has read Kant, who's been influenced by it, what those genealogies are, not just what Plato is. And that's why I started by talking about this archive that I've been spending my scholarship on, because to see it's not just Plato, it's not just Kant, it is the way that it has influenced things. And the thing that has, when we get in discussions about a particular book, like we did yesterday with Shelley, you know, Shelley has, AI is not going to be able to write with the deliberateness of illusion that a person came who has been deeply influenced by and hung out with and had weekends with and hated, and somebody stole somebody's spouse, right? And you have those living experiences. And then when you drop that person's poetry at a moment in your text, it's going to mean something different, right? Because we embed illusions, we embed what we have read. All of our language includes everything that we have read already. So I think where I see, and to be very specific, like, sure, the words can be delivered to readers through LLMs. That's awesome. But what we as humans and scholars and thinkers need to do is understand those genealogies of influence.
I was saying, how do you square this with the W.E.B. Du Bois? I sit with Shakespeare and he winces not. I mean, I sit with Claude and he winces not. I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, so W.E. Du Bois was saying, you know, I'm reading this book and he doesn't care my race, right? He doesn't care. And which is something maybe Plato should have thought about. Like when the text is sitting there, it's not going to have a bias against its reader. And I think about, you know, the ways that we are going to have young people approach Claude, and Claude doesn't care if you're a woman, if you're poor, if you're this or you're that. It is going to answer your questions. I'm all for it. Right? I am all for what LLMs can do to deliver, but those refinements.
But can I back up, Brendan, here? Because I think that it's already true about the technology of the book. Okay, that, I mean, if I don't normally like to talk like that, but since I'm with technologists, I'll be a technologist. That it's already true that. You know, it's one of the great ironies that Plato and Aristotle, who thought that very, very few people were capable of philosophy, their books are like widely printed, they're in paperbacks, they're cheap. Anyone can open it up, and they can, with Du Bois or with any of us, engage with this mind, which in experience, despite it being in the mind of a dead person, feels very much alive. And something which, you know, if you read these books every year, as I do, you know, you go back to them again and again, and you notice things that were never there before, and that are, again, part of this spontaneous act of thinking and imagination that creates these books. I think it's just not the, there's a human being that's behind each of the great books. Sometimes a community. So if we think about like the Iliad or the Hebrew Bible, you know, books which were written with audiences for over a community over a period of time, but it's always a human connection, and it's always that I think, I don't know how I would know how to read without thinking that there's a human being at the other end of that who is communicating something that they've perceived, they've experienced, they've thought, they've put together the judgment that they've formed.
Well, Just two responses here. First to Zena. There are books I can think of that is not a human connection, and those are religious texts. For Muhammad, for example, those aren't his words, right? Those are the words of Allah. And so this is the point I was trying to make, which is what we need behind a text is to have confidence that there's a structure behind it, not necessarily a human structure. And in religious texts, we're already very happy to do this. And if, again, this is not clearly not now, if we have an epistemic trust in the products of AI, I don't see why not having a human connection, but having a trust in the structure that created it is any different. And then to respond to Hollis's point, I'm really glad you brought up Frankenstein, because I think there's two separate claims that we need to discuss separately. The first claim is whether an AI can write a book like such as Frankenstein with the deliberateness, with the idea that if you poke into an seemingly arbitrary detail, it's not arbitrary, it's connected to a structure. That's the first question. And my answer there is clearly it can't do it now. I don't see a theoretical reason why it couldn't do it. And I think the burden of proof is on the person who says, no way, there's a theoretical limit. Then I think there's an even more interesting question. If it can write such books, does it matter that it's not a human who wrote it? And again, from genre to genre, I think it changes. In the case of Frankenstein, I don't think my enjoyment of reading the book is any less if you told me, if I didn't know who the author was in a lot of the cases, right? And so that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, also the monster read Milton, and we rejected him. This is an important point about the distinction, I think, playing out at another level. In other words, the monster had all of the eloquence in his own writing and in his own ability to engage with the great books, yet he was completely outcast by society for reasons that were aesthetic. For example, the watery eyes of the monster were called to mind. And ultimately kind of societal. And then he did a lot of violence, and then it was more justified. Right?
I just want to note here as a moderator that as we're discussing the possibility of an AI that could write Frankenstein without ever having read it or having in its training data, we're having booming peals of thunder and lightning in the background.
Well, can I respond a little bit?
Clearly this is of textual significance.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right. A non-human textual significance.
Well, it could
maybe.
be. So, I mean, I think you're right to distinguish, right, whether someday an AI could be able to do this, and would it matter? I'm going to pull back a little bit because we're supposed to be talking about education a little bit more broadly. And again, coming from the public education sector where, right now the great crises in public education, right, or what if you look at what states are wanting to do, or the way states and lawmakers are using AI, it's for things like workforce alignment, right? Workforce alignment, right? That the idea is all of these AIs are looking around the state or whatever state you're in the country and saying, these are the job openings, these are the trainings that you're going to need. And I have seen the algorithms, right, that these AIs do in creating curriculum for state universities. No philosophers, right? And this is a real problem with the AI algorithm, that because philosophers and readers of great texts can do everything, right, but aren't aligned to a particular job. So when I think about, and I guess I would push back against, sure, we can have AIs write novels as great, but is that our societal problem right now? And can we actually have AI do a more better things for higher education, which is talk about the importance of reading Plato, right? And whether with AI or without, or to how does AI support human flourishing? How does it get our state legislatures to think more broadly about the conversation that we're having here?
I'd like to, Zena, go ahead, and then I want to ask Brendan a question.
I wanted to formulate my version of that question, which is why we ask a lot of questions about what AI could do or what AI can't do, but the question I'm always interested in is, what do we want from AI? What is the problem, or what are the problems that in education, apart from those pragmatic ones that it can solve for us? That is, what are we looking for I'd be interested, especially in those of you who are, I mean, this is my chance to talk to people who are actually working on it. I mean, what's the aspiration? What problems can it solve?
Brendan, I think this is a good question for you. I'll add a little bit more onto this here. We've been talking a lot about what we stand to lose through AI. I think it's worth focusing on what we stand to gain, right? So I will just say personally in my own work, when I'm writing about AI, I'm usually writing in a pessimistic mode because it looks like potentially radical change, and I'm more of a conservative, small c at least. When I'm using it for my own purposes to get tasks done on my list, I feel great about it. And I haven't entirely reconciled these two things yet. I wonder how you feel about this, Brendan, in the educational system, right? Is there a way that you can create an AI that could solve some of the urgent problems that are facing higher education right now, or primary school education? Another way to put this is, if we have an educational system that's primarily designed around efficiency, and a lot of the worry is that education is continuing down the path where efficiency is the goal. Is there a way that you could imagine an AI being created that could expand an educational system that's based around a different concept, like eudaimonia?
Yeah, so one of the charges that gets levied against education, particularly like K-12 public school education, is that it's the Prussian model of educating for the industrial revolutions, educating factory workers, that's thing, and loyal citizens. You know, one of my favorite thinkers on this subject, and a person who's part of the eudaimonic tradition, is Wilhelm von Humboldt. He's a German philosopher. He is writing and thinking at an age that is not unlike ours, insofar as it's an incipient age of automation. And he embraces a lot of what Aristotle has to say about what it means to live a flourishing life. He adds to it a kind of romantic individualism. So it has a much more individual, plural character. He cares a lot more about developing individuality and uniqueness in humans, and which isn't absent in Aristotle, but it's different. And he has a minimal state in mind as well. He thinks a lot less of the kind of paternalistic state that Aristotle might envision for cultivating this. Okay, why do I bring this up? Well, the Prussian model, they're both Prussian, right? Humboldt's Prussian, the Prussian model. It's a different thing, and it happens under Bismarck decades later. Humboldt is, I think, more instructive as a kind of counter case, like a world that could have been if we had gone that way. And why do I say that? Well, because his aim was on trying to get individuals to have a cultivated self-development where they're trying things out, encountering the world, learning, and developing a sense of their harmonious, consistent self. And the way that I've tried to do this in my own life, I think like where my mind goes is, I have a 4 and a 6-year-old kid. And so what I do is they go to a school called Alpha School in Austin. They have a time-delimited period where they use AI 2 hours a day to try to master things like math and language. And they take what would have been a 6-7 hour day, crunch it down into 2 hours. They get shockingly good results at that. They learn at a very high rate. AI handles the kind of content delivery in a highly personalized way. Their teacher, who they call a guide in the Montessori style, is alongside them and helping them unblock and think about motivations. AI is analyzing their performance, coaching them, giving them insights about where they didn't read this or they skipped over this, and this is the kind of question in a very granular way that they need more of as part of their curriculum. So that's one component, right? Is a 2-hour component. Then for the remainder of the day, they're out in the world. They're trying things. They're doing really interesting tests. Like my daughter is a kindergartner. She has to ride a bike for 5 miles without stopping. She has to speak in public in front of 100 people. She has to do things that are pretty hard for kindergartners to do. And it's all kind of experiential, again, guide-based component. You learn a lot about yourself that way. And then the third component is that we do tutoring with her on some of the rudiments of philosophy, you might say, or on metacognition. So thinking about thinking, what it feels like to think and to be puzzled. Questions like, what is the difference between a bird and a plane? Or what about when daddy says something and the AI says another thing? Who's right? The answer is AI, according to her. But what if AI 1 says this and AI 2 says this? Then she's puzzled. and she has to think about it. And it raises these questions. It sparks a little bit of curiosity and gives her a little bit of a foothold into these questions. So I would say that those ideas are consistent with kind of the Humboldtian idea, which he called Bildung, of individual self-development. And they're a way to bring AI in that cultivates, strengthens the self-direction. I see her now going off and she'll say, you know, how do I garden? And she'll ask AI that question. I don't know how to garden. And I really delight in her asking those kinds of questions and being active about it. And it strikes me that it may be one of the coolest times to be alive as a 6-year-old for some. What I'll leave you with on this question is that there is a darker side of this, which is that the same technology that can make it a wonderful time to be a 6-year-old can also breed passivity, dependence, doom scrolling, that sort of thing. Sometimes this is the fault of the parents. Sometimes the parents are working 2 jobs and the technology functions as a kind of substitute. And sometimes it is simply kind of a lack of access. And yet, I think the enfeeblement that might result in an early childhood trajectory that is marked by this kind of passive use could create almost 2 classes of people. I say that with an awareness of how dark that sounds. It should not be so, but there needs to be significant work on trying to scale those models that inculcate the kind of self-direction, the autonomy that is going to be necessary, and the metacognition, frankly, to thrive in the AI age.
I think I just wanted to ask, because this is such a treat for me to be out of my Luddite bubble, to talk to people who use the technology and understand it. So here you have a device, you know, your phone or your social media accounts, which provides something, a mode of social interaction that you could do in person, but you can also do it on this device. And the device is easier to access. It overcomes all kinds of social anxiety. It's much easier to do, but it's also worse. There's an epidemic of loneliness. There's an epidemic of isolation. There's people who are, when they need to make human-to-human interactions, they can't. So I suppose listening to and thinking about this idea that AI could be used in the way that Brendan or Hollis and I think also Jonathan are describing it, where AI is used in a way that's inquisitive, that's open-ended, and that's critical. Not the way it's normally used in the college classrooms, but the way that it ought to be used or could be used. I worry that it would, in the same way that social media shortcuts that loneliness, which eventually drives you to go out and talk to a living human being, if the AI is, because it's so easy just to have something that seems like a conversation about the Phaedrus with your computer, it's keeping you from reaching out to asking a friend to read the Phaedrus or reaching out to a professor of a similar topic. And since intellectual community is sort of my purpose in life, I worry that we're going to see something which, even if all the best case scenarios turn out, it's going to increase social isolation and reduce the extent to which learning is a matter of human connection and human community.
But I will just say, you founded the Catherine Project.
Yeah.
It is using very advanced technology, the internet.
That's true.
And it's bringing people together. And I only say that as an example, a counterpoint to technological determinism, meaning you can build the kind of future that you want. I think this concern about atomization is long-standing, latent, articulated 1830 by Tocqueville. And there seems no doubt that AI could exacerbate it. It could create a hall of mirrors culture in which we have self-curated realities. We have all we need, or so we think, and we withdraw into ourselves. And that shatters something really important about human life and self-governance. Like, there's a very dark possibility there. But I would also say that it seems to open up an incredible opportunity to bring people together in important ways. So my answer on this and other issues is to go build that, like you've done.
But what does it look like concretely?
Well, Catherine Project.
Well, but Catherine Project, just the technology is a mere means. You end up with just reading books and face-to-face conversation. And it is a little worse than face-to-face community. It's worth it because it's sometimes the only thing, if you're a full-time caregiver, if you're deployed military, if you're elderly and immobile, et cetera. But there's nothing, so I'm just wondering I just want a little help thinking through what the AI, how the AI correctly used could be a vehicle for building face-to-face community and real interaction.
So one idea could be, one of our friends is building this, where people who have no exposure to the great books, they don't know where to start, and they just ask very basic self-help therapy questions, like I'm having issues with my girlfriend, and then through that they get introduced to certain books as a way through that. And to build an intellectual community, you can say, well, everyone who gets directed to Plato's symposium, let's say, then gets to read that together. And so, again, there's a very simple way, there's a sorting mechanism in order to build an intellectual community. But maybe you're not so far away from your Luddite circles, because I actually agree with your social media criticisms. I don't use social media like almost at all. There's an interesting question about why I post. It has to do with Rousseau in the first discourse about why he hates the printing press and still writes books, but I don't want to get into that. But I think, to echo Brendan's point, like, the only way to combat that, and this is actually, I think, why Rousseau wrote books, despite not liking the printing press, caveats there, is to write better books, or is to warn people about the printing press, is to go on social media and tell people about this, is to build better AI systems that lead people to community. Like, I don't think I think if to use it very simplistically, if all the good people retreat from society and refuse to engage with technology, then the only actors building it are going to be people who are looking to exploit.
One thing I want to mention is a project that Cosmos is backing, built by Gavin Leach, who's here, a brilliant computer scientist and philosopher, looks at written works using the really rich representations that LLMs allow you to obtain through embeddings. And there are multiple uses of this, but one of the speculative uses, I think, is if you write on Substack, if you generate a lot of written content, then it is possible, I think, never more possible than before, to kind of find your fellows.
I think that's right. I think that, and you said sorting, and I think that this is something that AI can do. I mean, you think about how we sort ourselves, how people choose colleges, which is badly, right? And or how you choose, you live in your town, your parents chose your town, your parents choose your school. I think that there's a way that finding community in different ways. I think about, Harry Potter and the sorting hats, right? That some sort of weird magic puts you into the house that you should be in. There's a way that radical individuality of, I was talking to a fellow who's putting the entire Library of Alexandria online, is what he says, and you enter this portal by asking questions, answering questions, and it comes up with your philosophical genealogy, so that you know where to read. And like, okay, everybody wants to be a Nietzschean, but maybe you're not, right? Or this or that or the other. But it can then sort you a lot better than a first-year writing class in a big public can.
Those were the friends that I was referring to.
Yeah.
Lightning is the
those
project
guys.
name.
Yeah.
And again, thank you. What I was going to say is there's another great example, actually, from Alpha School, where for a lot of I think this is maybe post-kindergarten, you tell me, they have what is called a child's knowledge graph and their interest graph. So what do they need to learn and what are they interested in? So if I need to learn second grade reading, and I really like MLB, right?
Right.
Like, if you can form sentences at that level about the current MLB season, that would be great. That's possible with an aristocratic tutor, right, who's dedicated to you. But those kind of activities are already available for AI to do. So there's a kind of way to bridge that. And even for me, I'm trying to learn ancient Greek right now. The AI is not fully there, but I'm also going to view allegedly where the Sirens lived, the islands where the Sirens lived. So I would love to read the passages in the Odyssey where he encounters the sirens, but my ancient Greek is not good enough for Homer yet. So I would love like a more reduced version, but authentic version of AI to read there. And so that's another, would be another example. Are people all going to use this instead of cheating with essays? Probably not. But again, it's up to build and design that system.
I'd like to jump in here. We have just a couple minutes left on the panel here. A final question, perhaps, I think this might be a question for Brendan, is doesn't a lot of this question, the whole question that we're talking about on stage here, come down to what we think of the people who are going to be building the technology and what we think their ultimate aim is? I will speak from my own experience. I was a computer science major in college. The reason I'm now sitting on this stage instead of building products is because of conversations like this that I had with my fellow computer science majors. I took a class on singularity and transhumanism, which is the idea that technology is going to take off at an exponential pace and we're going to stop being human. I was the only one in my class who was opposed to this idea. And the only one who even had a sort of a set of resources for questioning it at all. I was listening on my drive out here to a podcast, Ross Stout, that was interviewing Peter Thiel. And they're talking about AI, and they're talking about the fairly prevalent view that AI is going to be a sort of, it's either going to be or it's going to build a successor species to human beings. And Dowth had asked Thiel, do you think that we should preserve the human species or not, or should there be a successor species? And Thiel hesitates for it. Had to be a solid 25 seconds of thinking about it and then offering, and Ross asked him a couple of times, should we preserve the human species? And there was a very reluctant yes. You can imagine a path, you can imagine a couple of different paths for AI, right? Where there's one path where it's letting us do a lot more, and that's great. And there's another path where it's relieving us and making us do much less, and where that's a welcome blessing. And it's a world where all of the flaws that come along with people doing stuff and all of the terrible things that come along with human moral agency being wrapped up in things. You find this in driverless cars in the justice system. Every AI application that you can think of has enthusiasts behind it for whom it's pretty obvious that the main exciting thing is we're not going to have people do this anymore because we don't want to trust people with this. Do you think that is a majority or a minority view? Am I describing this correctly? I mean, I think this kind of maps to the reductionists that you've talked about elsewhere. Is this a valid concern? Do you think that the view of AI as expanding human agency is what most of the people who are building AI want for it?
I do not think it is the majority view. I think that we have found resonance, however, in this model. And that's been very encouraging to me. But I think that wrapped up in the question, there's a kind of eschatological narrative that both sides have embraced, a kind of end times narrative where in the one case we die, and in the other case we're superseded. And so we die in a way as well. And there aren't a lot of resources in either of the prevailing views, prevailing as measured by mind share, prevailing as measured by dollars. Philanthropic dollars, for example, 1.5 billion in the existential, pessimist position. There aren't resources to think about the human good. And I would say that places like St. John's have to continue to be in the game in their own way. I'm not advocating for a retooling, but they have to recognize that this is their moment. But, if the world creates moments when philosophy really matters, this moment is surely one of them. And never before has it been so important to have a kind of unity of thinking about the human questions, the perennial questions, with the builders.